Hello. Feels like forever since I've sat down and had a chat with you, and that's mainly because it is. Sorry, I've not been up to date on making any content for you, and I do apologise. I'm going to put this video in the prepper playlist and title it as a prepper video, mainly because it's in response to a comment that I had on one of my prepper videos before from a lovely lady called Terry Lynn from Minnesota in the USA, who had made a comment about the text test that the UK government put out to us all last weekend. It's Saturday today, so it was last Sunday, and she was asking, did we all know that it was a test? And yes, the government had, according to government records, they had informed 88% of the public that there would be this test happening. We were given the date and the time when it was going to happen, and we were told that it was a test. I have seen on other people's YouTube channels that the date and time were changed at the last minute, but I don't think they were. I knew about it. It was certainly in my diary that it was going to happen a couple of weeks before it actually happened. And the government had said that it's to inform us of impending emergencies like flood or wildfire, things like that. But I think most people in the UK, myself and everybody that I know, kind of thought, but we don't get that. We do have floods, but they are kind of confined to certain areas. So why they would want to tell everyone in the country the same thing at the same time, I don't know. And we're pretty good at handling things like that. The only flood that I can actually think of in recent years that was of kind of imminent danger to a lot of people was the one in Boscastle. Trying to think how long ago that was. That would have been probably about 16, 17 years ago, where Boscastle is a small harbour village on the north coast of Cornwall, down in the West Country. And there had been a massive amount of rain, and there was all of a sudden two rivers kind of converged and flooded down the valley into this little village, and it actually swept cars out to sea and all sorts of terrible things. I would have to look it up. I'm not sure if anyone did actually lose their life in that. I hope I'm right in saying that no lives were actually lost, but I might be wrong. I would have to look that up. But my thought about the text message in relation to that is, A, could they have got it out quick enough? And B, the way that Boscastle is, you would have to pretty much, as far as I can remember, drive down the valley that the flood came raging down in order to get out. So you would be driving into. I don't know there's anywhere that they could have driven to get away from it. They would have just had to stay in the valley and go on to higher ground. But as I remember from people telling me about it afterwards, I know that people were airlifted from their homes. Some of them were rescued by helicopter and airlifted away, pulled out of bedroom windows, that sort of thing. And I think maybe one or two of it, because the houses down there are very old, kind of fisherman's cottage type things, and there might have been quite substantial damage to building. But I just don't see that a text warning on that sort of event would have actually saved anything at all, and most of the floods that we usually see in this country are over large areas of farmland, large flat areas. And you kind of know that it's happening, and like I say, we're pretty good at dealing with that sort of thing. And again, I don't know that a text warning would really help that much. In terms of fire, apart from the Grenfell Tower in London that caught fire a few years ago, which was a block of flats, a very tall block of flats that caught fire. Once again, I don't know how much a text message would have helped the people in the flats, and people in surrounding houses could see that there was a big thing happening right in front of them, and they would have automatically moved away anyway. And the last, or the only big fire that I know about that actually sort of swept through and devastated a huge area, a huge inhabited area with terrible consequences, was the Great Fire of London. That was in 1666. And after that, when London was rebuilt, it was rebuilt, the wooden houses of the past were replaced by, there are still some timber framed houses left, but all the houses that were built subsequent to that were built out of brick and stone, so there's a kind of fireproof. Nowadays, if there are fires, they tend not to go rampaging through whole residential areas, you know. It's just a one house fire, or maybe one house and the house next door. It's not a huge area. And we don't get the huge kind of outdoor fires like California had, or like they have in Australia, where you get huge areas of woodland. You know, we get isolated forest fires, but again, our forests have fire breaks cut through them, so should there be a fire, it's actually managed so that there's a gap in between to kind of stop the progress of the fire, and that works pretty well. With, we don't have, you know, these long hot dry periods that other countries get. Although there was, in the local park, the park near to us where we take the dogs, trying to think how long ago it was. I must have been in my 20s, so 40 odd years ago. There was a fire about this time of year that devastated a relatively small area of woodland. Didn't completely burn down trees, but the trees were blackened and the whole of the forest floor was blackened. But I know it was this time of year because I remember walking my dogs afterwards and going through that area, and it being the most stunningly beautiful thing that I can remember seeing, because you had this completely charred tree structure. All the trees were completely blackened and the ground was completely black. But then you had all the fresh bluebells were coming up through it. So you had these green shoots and beautiful bluebells that were stood against this black background. It was absolutely stunning. I mean, unfortunately, you know, in those days, cameras were film cameras, and I don't know if it even occurred to me to, obviously it didn't occur to me to take a camera and take photos of it. And I've never seen photos of it since, but I remember it being absolutely stunning. And so going back to this text alert, sorry I'm rambling on as usual, but going back to this text alert, you know, most people that I know of just thought, what's the point? You know, we just don't see any need to have a whole area, or even smaller areas of the country, alerted to something going on. And so most of us just turn the alerts off. There are, apparently, I was reading yesterday that there are 3 levels of the alerts, and you can turn the bottom 2 level off on your phones, which most of us did. The 3rd level I can't even find on my phone. It's known as a presidential alert, but in this country it's known as a governmental alert. And I couldn't find it on my phone at all. You know, I'm searching through all the different ones. So whether they have, or they will sneak it in a later update, I don't know. And that one apparently you're not going to be able to turn off. And that does worry me in some ways, because if they do send through some sort of alert, I have heard, I think it was Canadian Prepper who said that the alert was, it's all about nuclear warning. And I just don't think it is. Because if you were to suddenly alert a lot of people that something terrible is about to happen, then your instinct is to try and get away. And we have nowhere to get away to. If I put it into context, that we live, the UK is actually, in terms of square miles, relatively small, with a high population. And I looked it up as Minnesota because it was Karen that had asked me the question about it. And Minnesota, according to good old Google, or was it Wikipedia, I read it on, but anyway, I went on the internet, and it said that Minnesota has 87,000 square miles and a population of 5,717,000. The UK has a square miles of 94,000. So, 87 against 94, it's not that dissimilar size-wise. But, whereas your population is just under 6 million, ours is just coming on to 70 million. And to put it further into context, in London alone, we have well over 9.5 million people, which is nearly 4 million people more in London than you have in the whole state of Minnesota. So to try and move anybody anywhere in this country, because 82% of our population live in towns and cities, and we are gridlocked at the moment. If you want to get across town first thing in the morning to go to a shop or to go to work or something, it can take you, half an hour to an hour to drive a mile down the road, because, we are such a small area with so much traffic now that they can't expect any of us to go anywhere, because we wouldn't be able to get there. And as we've found in recent times, when the press have told us that there are fuel problems, most people, I've learned, don't keep a full tank of fuel in their car. I tend to, because we've had years of having elderly parents, and we have not known in advance if we're going to get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning, which did happen on several occasions, where we've just got to get in the car and go to a hospital, an hour's drive away or 4 hours away. So I like to keep my car topped up with petrol, but most people don't. So when all of a sudden we're being told we're running out of petrol in this country, or gas as you would call it in America, then the first thing that everybody does is try and go and fill up their cars with fuel. And it just created havoc. I personally feel that it was just a press-driven exercise. We didn't actually have a shortage at that time. It was only a shortage in terms of getting it to the garages as fast as people were emptying the tanks at the garage. And so, even if you weren't stuck in the jams on the road, you would be stuck in queues trying to get your fuel, or you would be stuck on the road because half the other cars would be running out of fuel. So there's nowhere that we could go to if they wanted us to go to another area. In terms of nuclear bunkers, I think it was Canadian Prepper who was talking about, do we have nuclear shelters in this country? And basically, unless you're incredibly rich, no, we've got nothing like that. We've got small houses, tend to be, well, they used to be brick built, but now with modern building techniques, they tend to be sort of brick lower half and then kind of wooden and then tile hung on the top half of them. Our houses wouldn't stand up to any kind of bombing, really. So, there's no way that we could shelter at home from any kind of war type attack, which means that we would have to go somewhere else. In the town that I live in, there was a nuclear shelter. I know because I've been in it. When it was being built, it was kind of an urban legend that they were building a nuclear shelter for under the town hall. because I've been involved in elections and counting votes and things, I have actually been down there, because that's where they now count and hold the postal votes overnight. So I have been in that nuclear bunker. It's now been decommissioned. It was only ever supposed to be used for the town dignitaries. And even then, if you were going to have some sort of nuclear warning, then that person would have to get, who may not be, they're not spending their whole time working in the town hall, and they would have to get from wherever they were to the town hall on gridlocked streets. Again, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And just to further illustrate about how gridlocked the streets are, the estate that I live on, and the town itself is what's known as a new town. Post-war, when we lost a lot of housing in London to bombing, they designated new towns, which were smaller towns that were actually built up to take the people coming out of London, move some of the population away from London. We're about 28 miles south of London. And there were industrial areas built up. And interestingly enough, as I grew up in this new town, it was what they're now calling a 15-minute city. It was incredibly well planned out and thought out. And it had, you've got the centre of town with the main shopping, and then neighbourhoods all around the centre, and each of those neighbourhoods had its own parade of shops. So you had your butcher, your baker, your fishmonger, greengrocer. You had shops that sold everything that you wanted. Every estate had its own doctors and dentists. It had its schools, it had its churches, it had everything within walking distance. And so, when they talk about these 15-minute cities now, in theory, yeah, they're brilliant. I have lived that city, although it's not a city, it was a town. And at that time, it was very, very good when you could do that. But the problem came when the estate that I live in now was built in the mid-70s. And when our estate was built, the planning had assumed that there would be one car for every 3 houses. Nowadays, there are 2 or 3 cars per house, so you can imagine what it's like trying to park outside. We don't all have our own garages. We don't even have drives for every house. So we're all fighting for parking spaces out on the street. And a few years ago, there was, just for our house, I had my car, Neil had his own van, he also had a work van, because he would have a company van as well. And then if my son came down to stay with us, he would have his car as well. So that'd be like 4 cars for one house. Luckily my next door neighbour doesn't drive, so they don't have a car. But it's always been a challenge when you come home from anywhere just to find parking in the road outside. So you sort of scale that up over the size of the town. The estate that I grew up on, which had better, I'm trying to think how to say this, it's slightly more spaced out on that. The houses are semi-detached as opposed to terraced, and what were beautiful gardens when I was a child have now all been paved over and are used as parking for their cars. But again, most of those houses have 2 or 3 cars to try and fit on that, what used to be their front garden. So I just don't see any way of trying to move any of us anywhere other than our own homes. The only thing that I can think of that would be good for this text message was actually trialled a few years ago when we had all the lockdowns happening. Because apparently this text message going out to the whole country, I read yesterday, has been in planning for about 10 years. But it was put on hold because the report that I read said they couldn't decide which department was going to pick up the cost of it, and I'm assuming by that they meant governmental department, because it was going to cost £1 million to put this test into place. And it was actually trialled around about 2019-20, whenever we went into lockdown, where this text was sent out. But most people, it arrived 2 or 3 days late. You know, it took so long to get through the networks that I don't remember getting a text at all at the time. And the test that they've done last week, as I say, everyone that I know of, and certainly the majority of people on social media, had turned their alerts off, so we wouldn't have received them anyway. But of the people who left their phones on, what I'm reading about it is that, well, not their phones on, left their alerts on. I turned my alerts off and actually turned the phone off as well, just in case something got through. And the reason that I turned mine off was because there was a report, and I don't know if it's true or not, that when the alert came through, you either had to swipe it or click for further instructions so that they knew that you'd received the message. And if you didn't do that, then your phone would be inoperable for the rest of the day. And I thought, there's no way that I'm going to give over control of my phone to whoever to do that to it. I don't know if that was urban legend, if that actually would have happened. Of the people who got the text last Sunday, none of them reported anything to do with that. A lot of them reported that they didn't get the text at all. Our main mobile phone carriers are EE, Virgin and the 3 network, and all 3 of those reported that they had problems getting the text out. So it was kind of, I tried to look on the government website to see how they rated it in terms of success or failure, and I couldn't find anything at all officially telling us whether it was okay or not. The only thing that I could find said that it was only to be used in exceptional circumstances, may only be used once every 10 years, if at all. So I think most of us just couldn't be bothered with it. And lastly, the last thing that I want to mention on it, because it has been said that it was a nuclear warning, is I grew up under the threat of nuclear war. I was born 10 years after World War II ended, and everybody was kind of twitchy about things. You know, we had gone through a long period of war. You know, both my parents had been aircraft engineers in the Royal Air Force during the war. You know, my uncles we lost my mum's brother at the age of 23 in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. You know, we had everybody had personal connection to the war and had lost people in the war. So, you know, there was this great unsettlement as I was growing up about the whole Russia, USA nuclear thing, you know. And so I grew up with this threat, and there would often talk about bunkers and things in those days, but very few people, only the people that were really, really wealthy and had enough space on their land to build a bunker and had enough money to do it, actually did anything about it. The rest of us, we just realised that we were just kind of, for want of a better word, cannon fodder. You know, I mean, obviously it wouldn't be cannons, it would be fallout. I had kind of, by the time I was a teenager, resigned myself to the fact that the airport was 10 miles away. If there is a nuclear war and they go for the airport, the best thing I can do is just go outside and get hit in the first wave and go then. But I've since seen videos of people who know a lot more than I do about nuclear threat and modern warfare. And one chap had done a really detailed explanation of, if we were to be hit by a nuclear attack, where would they likely hit? And actually, Gatwick Airport wasn't on the list. And he also did a a map of where the fallout was likely to get blown, and according to his calculations, I'm pretty safe where I am. You know, but it's one of those things. If it happens, it happens. But even going back to nuclear reactors and problems there, not everybody does die if they're exposed to the radiation from nuclear. It's just one of those things that I'm not prepared to live the rest of my life worried about things that may never ever happen. So, you know, I prepare for things that are likely to happen, and that there is something that I can do about, you know. Even if I had the money in this house, there is nowhere, I don't have enough land to build any kind of shelter. If I were to, the only place in the house that would be termed as the safest place is where you've all seen it in my prepper pantry videos. It's that cupboard. But if I were to empty all the food out and hide in that cupboard, and the whole house was to collapse around me, I might never be able to get out again. You know, if the house just came down on top of me, you know, that might be it. Maybe I should have left the food in there. But then if there's not enough room for Neil and me in that cupboard with all the food, we'd never die of starvation, but we'd never get out again either. So anyway, Karen, it was lovely to have your comment, and I hope that's gone some way towards answering it, and the fact that you were concerned about us all here. We really appreciate the fact that you over in the States do think about us, but it's really not an issue. And again, sometimes things get blown out of proportion, and you know, I just want to calm anybody's worries. Back in the 2019, 2020, 21 things that were going on at that time, I saw an Australian YouTuber who said that it was so bad in England that they were shutting roads because of the bodies piling up in the streets, and it's like, that never happened. And I think sometimes these things have a grain of truth in them. So I'm thinking, okay, so what did happen? What did happen is, in certain places, temporary morgues were put up in some streets. I think there were about 5 or 6 of them across the country. I don't think there were very many of them at all. I don't think that the roads were closed because they were there. They may have been closed when they were being erected. They were temporary structures. I don't think they're there anymore. I don't think any of them ever saw a body. You know, we just didn't have the anticipated deaths at the time. So, but it's these things that, you know, urban legend, the word gets out and Chinese whispers, and it all becomes so much worse than it actually is. And it was never that bad. You know, I personally don't know anybody who died of COVID. You know, I know people whose lives were lost during that time, but they were all for other reasons. You know, there were people who were terminally ill with other things at that time, and as far as I know, had nothing to do with the virus whatsoever. So anyway, I'm just thinking, I don't know how long I've been rabbiting on for. It might cut out at any minute. It's time I wrap it up anyway, because it is going to end soon. But anyway, thank you very much if you stayed with me all through the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon. Lots of love to you all. Okay, bye.